With Chapter 6, we'll cover the concepts of risk and return. This is a rather long chapter with a lot of formulas and calculations, so I've divided the lecture into 4 segments. We'll start with basic risk and return concepts and evaluating standalone risk. Referring back to our basic diagram, risk and return leads us to valuing equity. When we use the term investment return, we could be referring to dollar returns, but more usually in finance we measure returns as a percentage of funds invested. This allows easier comparison of various investment options. Measuring historical returns on an investment is certainly important, but we're also concerned with prospective or expected returns. This is a simple example involving only the purchase price investment of $1,000 and the ending value $1,060. The percent return is just the ending price minus the price paid divided by the price paid. Return, however, is not the only issue with an investment. With an investment, risk is related to the probability of earning a return less than expected. Getting more than expected is good, less is bad. Consider a 10-year zero coupon bond. Zeros are exactly what their name implies. They pay 0 coupons. You buy them at a deep discount and are paid the face value at maturity. Shown on the slide is the probability distribution for the expected returns on this bond over the next year. Graphing the probability distribution shows that the returns generally follow a symmetric normal curve. Modified to a continuous distribution makes the curve more obviously a normal curve. The expected return computed from a probability distribution is simply a weighted average of the expected returns in each state, with the weights being the probabilities. For this bond, the expected return is 6%. Excel has a function that will calculate a weighted average given the weights or probabilities in one range and the expected values in a second range, sum product. This shows the use of the manual and the Excel functions. If risk is the probability of a return less than expected, then the goal line is riskier since it has more area under the curve to the left. Both curves are normal curves, they're just not the standard normal bell curve we're familiar with. Both curves do make another point as well. To eliminate downside risk, the left, you have to give up upside potential, the right. No free lunch. Risk can be approached in several ways, the easiest of which is standalone risk, looking at an investment as if you hold it alone. Standalone risk is measured by the standard deviation of the expected returns on the investment. Here is the basic formula for standard deviation of expected returns. Variance and standard deviation measure the same thing, dispersion around the expected result. In finance, we use standard deviation rather than variance as the measure of risk. If returns are expressed as a percentage, then standard deviation is a percentage as well, while variance is percentage squared, not as intuitively comfortable. Applying the formula from the previous slide to the zero coupon bond, we find a standard deviation of 10.95%. Again, Excel can be used to perform these calculations using the sum product and square root functions. This example demonstrates calculating expected return, variance, and standard deviation using the manual, table method, and using the Excel functions. The standard normal curve is shown in Figure 6.4 in your text. If the return will be within one standard deviation, 68.26% of the time, it'll be outside this range 1 minus 0.6826, or 31.74% of the time, or about 16% of the time above, 16% below. We're concerned with the downside risk, the probability of less than a minus 5. Greater than 17% would be great. The point: return is not the only metric in choosing an investment. You must evaluate the expected return relative to the risk. Higher risk should bring a higher return. Using historical data versus expectational data requires a different formula for standard deviation. With expected returns, the probability distribution defines the entire range of outcomes. Using historical data, you are using a sample from a population when you do not have all the population data. The formula for expected return of historical data is a simple average. The standard deviation of a sample is designated by S rather than sigma. In the formula, since the average return is an estimate, you lose a degree of freedom. Thus, the denominator is t minus 1. These are the Excel functions designed to handle sample data. From the mini case, 10 years of historical data for the market, Blandy, and Gourmand. Using the formulas for historical data, we can find an estimate of the past standard deviation for the market, Blandy, and Gourmand. Note that Blandy has provided a return below the market, but has been riskier. Gourmand has provided a higher return than the market, coupled with very high risk. For Blandy, we assume in finance that returns on stock are normally distributed. With an expected return of about 7% and standard deviation of 25.2, you can easily see that Blandy is a risky investment. We'll end Part A of Chapter 6 here. In Part B, we'll move from standalone risk to portfolio risk.